Hello everyone, what we have here today is a Balisong by the company Balisongs, not to be confused with this knife here made by Bear Ops, which is a division that is under Balisongs from what I understand. Anyway, this one is the only knife from either company with a Cocobolo wood handle, and it's labeled as their CB17 model in case you want to search for this online. The knife is available on a variety of websites with various prices. Blade HQ currently has it still in stock on sale for just under $80, but the MSRP for the knife is $109.95. Oddly, this knife does not show up on Balisongs' official website, so I'm not sure if the CB17 is on its way to becoming discontinued or what the deal is exactly. I've wanted this knife for the better part of a decade now, ever since I saw it on a website called Bud K, and it was actually gifted for me on Christmas last year from my lovely wife-to-be. So when I realized what knife this was on Christmas Day, I had a gigantic, stupid smile on my face. The only thing that threw me off is that the one on Bud K, at least in the pictures, show rivet pins instead of screws. No idea why. I mean, I thought they were the same knife, but maybe not. Oddly enough, this knife only comes in one color and one style. Usually companies carry at least 2 or 3 different versions of the same model, whether the blade looks different or different colors, whatever the case may be, but no, the CB17 only comes in this particular style and color. Which is kind of unfortunate because a version of this knife with black steel on the bolsters and screws instead of the nickel finish would have been much more visually appealing, at least in my opinion. While I'm on the subject, we should take a closer look at the knife. So it's fairly standard in size for the typical Balisong, about 9 inches across with a roughly 4-inch blade. The knife is American made, as you can tell from the branding on the clip point blade here. There is no marking on the blade, however, to state what the steel is, but I found online that it allegedly is made from 440 high carbon stainless steel with a black titanium coated finish. The handles are sandwich construction by design. Nickel finish on the bolsters, as I mentioned earlier, and it has a very cheap traditional latch that I am absolutely not a fan of, but I'll talk more about that later on. The inlays are red Cocobolo, and I think they look absolutely gorgeous. The knife in general, honestly, I think looks really nice, so I have to commend them on that. They do know how to make a knife look pretty. When I first really started to look at this knife, I was confused by the blade. It has no pins on it, like every single other Balisong that I have. I'm used to having or seeing knives with 1 or 2 tang pins, or maybe even Zen pins, but usually with Zen pins they're easy to find. This knife, I guess, technically has Zen pins, but they're different than that of what I'm used to seeing. What I mean is that the Zen pins are actually incorporated into the handle, as opposed to other Balisongs where the Zen pins are exposed, usually showing a screw where you can, I guess, adjust or replace them if they get damaged. What I thought was clever about this design is that they modified the blade so that the tail end of the tang has this protruding squared off section here. I've never seen this before, and I think it's honestly an ingenious design. The only question I have is whether or not the hidden pins will last over time, and because this knife is no longer on the official website, I highly doubt they carry any replacement parts for it whatsoever. The CB17 is a very lightweight knife. It only weighs at 4.2 ounces, which is lighter than what I would typically feel most comfortable with flipping. I personally like something more in between 4.5 to slightly over 6 ounces, but of course everyone is different and has their personal preferences with that. This knife comes razor sharp out of the box. I mean, it cuts a mean piece of cheese or even a delicious steak like butter. It's actually one of the sharpest knives I've ever owned that came like this straight from the factory. So let's now talk about the performance of this knife and what it's really like to flip it. I guess you could say I have a love-hate relationship with it. Like, the knife flips really well. It's technically one of the more smooth ones in my collection. Even with so much as a light flick of the wrist, the handle swings effortlessly and keeps on swinging in a pendulum-like motion for a handful of seconds until it finally stops. And that is exactly how it's been since I've had it. I have yet to play around with the screws, loosening them, tightening them, or even applying Loctite. The only problem I have with this knife that does worry me is how I feel much more prone to cutting myself while messing up a trick. Not because the knife is stupid sharp, but because the handles themselves are not only extremely smooth and have no grip to them at all, they're also very skinny. Whereas the opposite goes for this Bear Ops knife here, which has an overabundance of texturing and handles so thick, I feel like I have to wear a condom just to flip it. Now don't get me wrong, I really do like flipping this thing, but I would never consider the knife to be a great flipper because of those reasons. Not so much the skinny handles, I can deal with that, but the lack of any texturing providing any sort of grip is a big negative for me. It's just that the sole idea of performing a trick like a helix, a blender, or really anything remotely challenging is out of the question for me in regarding this particular knife. Normally I would do a little montage type thing here where I would show myself flipping the knife, but because of my recently discovered batch of just awesome diseases that we discovered last September, I should not be flipping sharp knives, period, because any trauma that is inflicted to my skin, whether it could be a bruise, a nasty scrape from falling, even so much as a paper cut, I run the risk of my white blood cell count spiking to very dangerous levels, which may or may not cause large, hideous skin ulcers that could form on my body looking like some straight up MRSA wounds. So yeah, I'll do some like simple moves for you all today, but if you're expecting anything else, you can suck my balls. So now let's talk about the latch. If you've watched my Balisong reviews before, you know that one of my biggest pet peeves are these stupid, cheap, traditional latches on expensive knives. And yeah, I'm gonna consider an $80+ knife to be expensive when you consider that you can find dozens upon dozens of knives on eBay, Amazon, or wherever else for what, 30 bucks, maybe even 20 or less, that do have spring assisted latches. It is impossible for me to give any benefit of the doubt either simply because the knife is American made. I couldn't give a shit if the knife came from Kuwait of all places. If a $20 knife from China or Taiwan can have a spring-assisted latch, then why doesn't this American-made one that cost, what, nearly 4 or 5 times that amount? What's the excuse here? What am I not understanding? And yes, I know you can throw a small O-ring on the base of the latch so it doesn't get in the way of flipping. I understand that, but it doesn't change how I feel about this subject. The last thing I want to discuss is this knife's reliability. So Bear Ops and Bear & Son knives have a weird reputation of being hit or miss in regards to its manufacturing. Sometimes you get a knife that falls apart in minutes, while others hold up perfectly fine over time. I guess I happen to fall into that totally fine category because I've had no issues with this knife whatsoever. Of course, I do question the Zen pins like I brought up before, and there is one other thing that slightly bothers me. When you open the knife and squeeze into the middle of the handle, it flexes quite a lot. And hear me out, I am not putting a stupid amount of pressure on it to the point of it being unrealistic like some other people have done. But the flexing makes me worried that the steel is either not strong enough or it is too thin to where if I do end up dropping this knife, it could possibly snap at the handle. But outside of that, I don't really think this knife is going to break on me anytime soon. However, if it did, I don't know if I would be that surprised, to be honest with you. One final thing I've noticed is that while the finish of the blade is very nice, it is not going to hold up with consistent flipping. The insides of the handles scratch just ever so slightly on the fatter parts of the blade, of course causing damage to its finish. This isn't like super uncommon to come across on cheaper Balisongs, even sub $120 Balisongs, but still, for those who want to keep their finish from getting damaged, this sucks. So for my final thoughts, well, I don't know if I could recommend this knife for hardcore flipping because of the fact that the knife has no grip on it whatsoever. For dicking around with basic or even some intermediate moves, that might be fine, but for most intermediate to advanced tricks, I don't think this is going to be anyone's go-to knife. I'm sure there are people who do flip this knife doing ridiculous tricks and, more power to them. To me, I see this as more of a occasional flipper and maybe even a display piece because, again, it is a really pretty knife at the end of the day. But is it worth $80 or more? I'll leave that one up for you to decide. So until next time, everyone, as always, thank you all so much for watching, and take care.